Okay, good morning, members of council and public and staff that are joining us today. We have a special council meeting today to discuss the community benefits charge draft strategy. I'd like to start off the meeting as we always do with adoption of the agenda. Yeah, we could. We have joining us today. We have, sorry, Councillor. So let's hold on one sec. We've got Councillor Shepherd, Regional Local Councillor DePaulo, myself, and Councillor Barros, and we have Councillor Silovitz and Regional Local Councillor Pirelli joining us at the moment on virtually. Okay, so first item on the agenda, adoption of the agenda. Councillor Shepherd, Councillor DePaulo, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that carries. Thank you. Second item, disclosures of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Seeing none, Mr. Clerk. So our scheduled business today, we're going to have a presentation by Gigi Lee, our Director of Financial Services and Treasurer, and also Mr. Gary Scanlon from Watson and Associates regarding the community benefits charge draft strategy. So I would invite, I guess, Ms. Lee, if I could get you to come up first and get things rolling for us. Okay, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and members of council. It's my pleasure to present to you at this morning's special council meeting an update on the city's community benefits charge strategy. Bill 108, the More Homes, More Choices Act in 2019, and Bill 197, COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act in 2020 have made amendments to Ontario's Planning Act and Development Charges Act with respect to how municipalities generate funds from development in Ontario. The amendments in regard to the CBC were proclaimed and came into effect on September 18th of 2020. Eligible municipalities have 2 years after the date of proclamation to transition to the new rules and pass a CBC bylaw if they wish to impose these charges. Municipalities across the province are working towards adopting a policy approach to the CBC strategy. In the fall of 2021, the city retained Watson Associates to undertake the CBC strategy process. It's been a collaboration between Watson and city staff in preparing the CBC analysis and policy recommendations. The draft strategy and bylaw will be finalized and released over the next couple of weeks. Similar to the development charges bylaw update, the purpose of this meeting is to kick off the process by providing council with the background and context on the community benefits charge. The objective is to inform council to help gain a better understanding of the CBC and an opportunity for members of council to ask questions and provide comments in advance of the release of the strategy. I'll now turn it over to Gary Scanlon from Watson Associates, who will guide us through the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Mr. Scanlon, nice to see you in 3 dimensions, and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Always a pleasure to be before council. So we've put together a presentation and we'll step through to kind of overview this emerging, changing piece of legislation. Next slide, please. So just a quick agenda. We'll go through, the initial aspects of it. We'll talk about community benefit charge. It is something that was in place, but it's been modified. So there are changes from what you have done as a municipality historically. Give you an overview on the methodology. There are mandatory exemptions they've introduced, and then we'll talk about this, the process we'll be following. Next slide. So the timelines, as was noted, we're really the detailed discussions we've had with staff were early in this year, and we've been working with them to develop the calculations. And we're almost to the point of finalizing a document for circulation to the public. It'll probably be about another week. So you can see right now we're at step 3. We'll be releasing the background document over the next 10 days. And then from that point, we'll do an engagement with the build and the development community to overview the background study. And then we'll be back before council to consider the bylaw in late June or early July. Next slide. So the funding, this is just a quick overview of for funding growth-related expenditures, what the province has provided as tools to the municipalities in Ontario. So development charges is one that's often talked about. In recent times, and we were before you not too long ago, the province has made modifications where they have reduced the number of services which can be collected through development charges. They've reduced it down to 20 services in total. Not all of those services are ones that you provide, but in between the region and yourselves, that's where it's covered off. Cash in lieu of parkland, that's been under the Planning Act for many years. There have been some refinements to that. But to be clear, parkland is not something that we can recover through development charges, but we can pay to develop land. The province said, if you want money for land, then you have to go through the Planning Act in order to obtain it. And then we're left with the community benefit charge, which once again is under the Planning Act. And historically, this has been imposed where the height or the density is in excess of what the planning provisions allow for different areas. So if you exceeded that, then you could negotiate with individual developments to provide a contribution to the municipality. Ergo, it's called community benefits charge, also referred to as bonus zoning. Its nickname is bonus zoning charge. So that's where we are going to focus our discussions today. Next slide. And again, please. So as I've said, traditionally, Section 37 of the Planning Act was to secure these contributions through agreements where the rezoning would allow increased density or increased height over and above what was the planning permissions. Historically, I think the city's used it for about 15 years. And over that period, you've received either cash contributions. In certain instances, there have been programming space that's been within tall buildings, which have been made available to the city so that programming can be undertaken. Sometimes as small as 1,000 square feet. We have seen up to 2,700 square feet of programming space. At times, assisted housing has been requested for dedication to Housing York. And then there's been minor within the area, minor improvements to either sidewalks or private roads, trails, et cetera, that have been provided. That's what's been negotiated. Next slide, please. So where historically the community benefit charge was imposed where there was higher density type of development, what the province has done now is they've changed it and they've broadened the availability so that the charge will apply or can apply to any buildings that have a minimum 5 stories or greater and have to have a minimum 10 residential units within it. So if you meet that definition, then a charge can be imposed. And the charge is no more than 4% of the land value, the market value of the land the day before a building permit. So they've broadened the number of properties who could be imposing a charge, but they put a cap. So if you've got a $1 million piece of property, 4% would be $40,000. That's the maximum amount that you could recover from that individual property. Next slide. Under this, I might note that this charge is only available to local municipalities such as yourself or separated cities. The regions or counties throughout Ontario cannot impose this charge, so it's limited to the more localized developments. Basically, they're to recover growth-related capital costs similar to a development charge, but basically it doesn't embrace it embraces the services for the most part that you can't recover under a development charge. So they've kind of now given you the full spectrum of services, but once again, they've put limitations on the CBC. You have to make sure that we go through a process. We must provide a background study, which they call a strategy, and go through a public process, which isn't as defined as the Development Charges Act. It's softer. It just talks about engagement, and then council can consider the bylaw. Next slide. And one more, please. So as set out, as I've noted, 5 stories, minimum 10 residential units are the buildings which we could consider for imposing the charge. In order to calculate this, so part of the strategy that we have to develop, we must look out over a planning horizon, roughly 10 years. So we'll take a look at within that 10-year period, what units, so basically for the most part, apartment units would be eligible. And within those apartment units, not all apartment units would be imposed, only those apartments that are within that 5-story minimum 10 residential units. So we have to forecast out over the next 10 years what properties we anticipate coming through. We then have to estimate the land values associated with those buildings. So depending on the location, depending on the density of the individual properties, the value will be different for individual properties. You could have a property and that builds a building 10 stories, maybe X number of units in one part of the city, and the value is, let's say, $10 million an acre. And in another part of the city, the exact same buildings being built, but the land value is only $5 million. The charge will be different because it's 4% of the land value. So there will be differences in similar buildings depending on the area in which they'll charge. As I've noted, it's a 4% maximum envelope or a charge that we can impose, but we have to justify up to that 4%. There are some calculations that we're doing on behalf of municipalities, and they're working out at 6.5% or 9%, but they can't charge more than the 4% in the calculation. Once again, similar to DCs, it's capital costs. So we'll be looking at individual projects on which we're going to base the charge. Next slide, please. And I won't go through in detail. It's a little small and I apologize, but this is basically the process that we have to go through. And I'll describe it in the next couple of slides. But it's to some extent, the way it's laid out is similar to how they've defined a development charge, the steps we go through, but not quite as onerous as the Development Charges Act. So if we go to the next slide. As I say, we start with identifying over the next 10 years what the eligible amount of growth is. And we're going to look at the amount and the type and location of these eligible developments because, as I say, the land values will change depending upon where they're located within the city. We've been working with staff. We've looked at an appraising report, which will help to provide us with those values. And we've been working with planning staff to identify the location. Next slide. As I say, the land values is very important to these calculations. So we have identified the areas. So we've identified about 3 or 4 different key areas of the city where the average values would be considered. So when we come out with the report, we'll be showing you based on the appraisal report, the average land values for those different locations. Next slide. The Planning Act talks about identifying the increase in need for services. So it's very similar, the wording and the way that we do some of the calculations, very similar to what's there in the Development Charges Act. So we're finding, to some extent, we're piggybacking on the Development Charges Act to give us some insight into some different things. How do we define increase in need for service? How do we define what a capital cost is, et cetera. So we've been working with staff to identify the various types of services which may be included in our calculations. Next slide, please. So the services, as I've noted, are basically everything that we don't include in the development charge could be eligible. So we've got, we could provide, if you're going to expand or build another administration building, we could consider that. museums, art centers, so any cultural type of facilities or buildings could be eligible. Public art, heritage preservation, landfill, public realm improvements, et cetera. So all of these non-DCable types of services we can pull in. We'll be considering some of the different types of agreements that you've entered into in the past and look to potentially including some of those services. Parkland acquisition, over and above what your parkland bylaw provides, we can include additional contributions for parkland. And then lastly, this is cited in the Act. It says if there's certain growth projects that you didn't include in the DC, we could include it in as part of these calculations. But what we've discussed with staff is keeping the development charge pure and those services so that we don't have a crossover or any type of perceived double dipping. So we will not be using that component. Next slide. So just as an example, and what we had talked about is, what if we have, in this example, a piece of land that's $10 million, it's about an acre, and we're going to build about 200 units on that acre of land. So if we look at the table, we've got 1 acre, we've got the value of land, which is 10 million for that acre. The charge that we could impose is 4% of that market value of the land. So to be $10 million times 4% will yield $400,000 from that particular development. If we divide it by 200 units, which generally is about the height associated with that land value because of the density, it works out in the range of about $2,000 a unit. What we've seen in the calculations we've been doing so far is maybe they're from a low of $1,500 a unit to a high of somewhere in the range of about $2,500, $2,700. So that generally is the range that we're seeing as a result of these calculations. Next slide. And again, please. So in essence, it's a fairly simplified process, a little bit different than the development charges. We need to prepare a background strategy. DCs call it a background study, but it's a strategy that we use. We must, once we have that, put it out to the public and engage with a discussion with individuals who the municipality feels are the ones that would be most interested in this type of charge. It does not provide for a mandatory public meeting like we do under the development charge, and it does not provide for a mandatory 60-day circulation period. It just says, put the strategy out, have dialogue, and then at that point, council can consider the bylaw. And once it's passed, we get into an appeal period that is like the development charge. They have up to 40 days to appeal the passage of the bylaw. If there's no appeal, then it continues on for many years. If it is appealed, then like development charges, we go to the board. Now, initially, the legislation did not have a time horizon on how long the bylaw is valid. They've now made changes under the recent Bill 109, where they've said, okay, within 5 years, when you pass the bylaw, within 5 years, you have to revisit it and consider whether it's still valid and whether you need to undertake some form of update. So we'll need a council resolution or some turning your minds to that bylaw. If you don't do that, it becomes invalid at the end of 5 years. So there's a mandatory process similar to the DC, but not exactly, where you have to reconsider the bylaw. Next page. And one more, please. So once again, just to summarize, we're at step 3 in the process. We will be back with the background study. It'll be released, the strategy, within the next 10 days, and then we'll commence a dialogue with the development community. Now, I will mention that we've already had an initial discussion with them to go through some of the background more of an education type of session, and received some initial feedback from them, and we'll be considering that feedback as part of the strategy. We're hopeful that by end of June, early July, council can be turning their minds to the bylaw. And through you, Mr. Mayor, that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scanlon. So at this point, we'll bring it back to council. We do have a staff recommendation for a motion that all comments be received and referred back to staff for integration into the draft strategy. So at this point, I'd bring it back to council and ask if we get a motion in for that, and also to give everybody an opportunity to ask questions. So Councillor Silovitz, go ahead. You'll be willing to move that motion?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'll gladly move that motion with thanks. I don't have any specific questions at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Regional Local Councillor DiPaolo. You want to second that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to second the motion from staff, but I do have a question through you, Mr. Mayor. With the community benefits charge is on top of other development charges, it's on top of cash in lieu of parkland. So it's something that applies in high density residential, high density residential and office, or just residential?
The Act talks about a building that's 5 stories and contains at least 10 units. So it could be a mixed use building, and the charge would apply.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you're aware, but because Watson does so much work for us in this area and our development charges and everything, we have a transit-oriented community imposed on us by an MZO with about 95 acres of land that will all be well over 5 stories, and the land valuation would be between $10 and $30 million an acre. What would if we say 20 million, when you're talking about densities of 9 FSI and 60 and 80 stories, I think 20 million is conservative for land value. What it would be assessed at the time of building permit. So maybe even much higher, but let's say it's $2 billion of land value, and 4% of that we'd be entitled to for community benefits charges. Do you know if the city of Richmond Hill will be able to develop or generate any community benefit charge on that transit-oriented community, which could be 4% of $2 billion or much more?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, if the question is, can we impose the charge on those particular lands? The answer is yes.
Okay.
I don't see a restriction in either, certainly not in the Planning Act, or in, I don't understand there's any additional restrictions that have been imposed on those lands for us to impose charges like development charges or these types of charges.
Okay, so the MZO bypasses the municipality for zoning and for site plan, but presumably those landowners will be coming to us for a building permit, and at that time we can negotiate a CBC based on the strategy that's been
so
adopted.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the charge is imposed the day before building permit. So, and then it'll be the then market value of those lands.
Okay, so I'm not really understanding how it's negotiated or how it's set. In a lot of cases, it's contingent on the zoning. You get this particular zoning is if you're willing to pay this community benefit charge, and there's a negotiation. But in this case, where they're guaranteed the zoning, they have their site plan, and they're coming for a building permit. How would that work?
So the way and we're obviously talking to staff on how different municipalities are looking to organize it a little bit differently. But here our discussions are, we'll be seeking to get an appraisal, doing an appraisal of those properties, and that appraisal will be there basically on the day that they're going to receive the building permit. So we'll have an appraised value. We'll take a look, and if it says 20 million an acre, as you say, then it would be 4% times that 20 million. That's the amount they owe for the CBC. Now, if we're doing the appraisals, and the landowner says, no, I don't think it's that much, they're allowed to as well. They may say pay in protest, and they may get their own appraisal. And then if the municipality doesn't agree with it, you can have a third appraisal. So we get into a little bit of dueling appraisals, but it does provide for a process. If you don't agree with it, to basically have it considered by 3 different individuals, and then the resultant one will be the one that we'll use.
Okay, so there'll be an arbitrated fair calculation.
Absolutely.
Up to that 4%, council will essentially declare what it wants as a community benefit charge.
So it's a very good question. You can, through you, Mr. Mayor, you can, if they want to provide a service, like in-kind service, in-kind contribution, you can allow for that. So it's not necessarily only the money, but historically you've allowed for some public space to be provided so you can do programming. So that would be, we'd have to figure out a valuation associated with that. So let's say it's $1 million, whatever, in-kind contribution, and they still owe another $1 million, then they would give you cash for the other half. So that will be addressed in the bylaw, and it is allowed for.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next on the list is Councillor Chan, and I see Councillor Shepherd after that. So Councillor Chan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and with your indulgence, I have the video off so that I can ensuring I get a good connection on internet. Thank you for the presentation. I'm glad that the Speaker, Regional Councillor DePaul asked those questions because I have that in mind. How's that going to be applied to the provincially imposed transit on the communities? Now, since those questions have been answered, I try to maybe seek clarification. On the slide number 15, it talks about the potential services to be considered. The question I have is to give some examples of non-DC eligible. Would projects such as for retirement homes, basically not for profit or for profit purpose-built rental buildings, would this CBC would apply to them as well through Mr. Chair? It's not clear to me.
Oh, sorry. Through you, Mr. Mayor. There are certain exemptions which would basically be nonprofit housing, certain types of retirement homes, Royal Legion types of buildings and such. So there's about 3 or 4 different exemptions that they're providing for. So it's not an extensive list, but it's not the same list as development charges. So,
thank you. And I just want to compliment, I certainly find that multicolored page 11 on this presentation, the CBC methodology helps, I guess, I for one, to try to better understand the process. The last question I have at this point in time is that at what point in time would that, maybe you cover in the beginning, a CBC bylaw would apply? I'm trying to think of when does it crystallize, at the time when a planning application was made or when the actually building permit will be issued? Through you, Mr. Chair.
So through the chair, it's building permit issuance.
Okay. The reason I raised that, it might have potential ramification depending on the parties or applicants' estimation. Would they be quote unquote in a better position in terms of the amount of payment after the CBC bylaw would be adopted by council? Because you just mentioned, the consultant just mentioned, is at the time of the building permit. So I just want to get a sense, perhaps to the extent that the consultant can advise us from the chair. Isn't it get into some kind of, I won't call guessing game, but calculation, estimating, or would it be better off if I were applicant to negotiate with the city for a current Section 37 of the Planning Act benefits, or would I be better wait until CPC bylaw is passed? Just wonder what your views are, through Mr. Chair, to the extent possible.
Well, currently, through the chair, it's only those high density units that you would have you'd negotiate something. This will, once implemented, will broaden the who's being charged. It's everybody that has a 5-story building or higher and minimum 10 units in it. And if they're not clear of the valuation, I mean, it's to some extent easy enough to engage with an appraiser to understand what the value of your land is. So you would know whatever percent we can charge up to 4%. And then it's simple, 4% times whatever the value is of the property. That would be the amount of the charge. But as I say, what we're finding is in our calculations, generally they're in the range of $2,000, maybe $2,500 a unit as the overall charge, if you break it down by the amount divided by the units.
Okay, thank you. So if I understand it correctly, the CBC bylaw, if and when adopted, would offer certainty to a certain extent, because depending on the appraised land, if I were an applicant, then I know what percentage would apply to the estimated or not estimated appraisal land value. Is that correct, through the chair? You're
absolutely correct, through the chair. You
Okay.
would know what the value is. If you know your land, you know what the value of the payment is.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And if now that you confirm that, then I'm wondering, maybe not for us to discuss or for any further comment, is that any astute applicant can really try to work out the numbers in terms of negotiation at this point in time before the CBC bylaw sets in. Those are my comment, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for me to ask the question, and thank you, our consultant and our staff for doing everything. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chan. Next person on the list is Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Speaker, most of my questions were somewhat answered already, but my first question was respecting the appraisal. So you've answered that obviously gets time at the time the applicant applies for the building permit. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then the second question was respecting dispute resolution. If there's a dispute regarding the assessed value of the land, which you answered, does the bylaw in fact cover how the process works? Okay.
Yes, that's correct. And it's actually laid out in the legislation. So it's very clear by the legislation. We'll do it. If they don't like it, they'll do it. Yeah, the act does say, well, within 5%. So if you're off by 3%, it's considered valid, the cities. And then the city will maintain a list and of eligible appraisers. And if we still have dueling appraisals at the end of that, then both will agree on a third appraisal, and that will be the one we go with.
My next question was respecting the application of the bylaw. Does it apply retroactively once it's signed to buildings that were already in the process of approval but don't have building permits? What's the date it applies?
If you have agreements with Section 37 agreements with any of the buildings, because normally they're negotiated earlier than building permit. If you have got an agreement, then this wouldn't apply because you've already imposed a charge under 37. Subsequent to that, it's basically when you pass the bylaw, the next day that charge would be active.
And then my next question was regarding the percentage imposed. You're saying up to maximum of 4%. Are there criteria set forth in the bylaw that would allow us, first of all, is it discretionary or are there criteria set forth to determine why up to 4%? And if a lesser value is determined, how does that work?
It's similar to a development charge. They're asking us to take a look at, over the next 10 years, look at listings of potential capital projects that might be undertaken by the municipality. And then we would have the value of those projects, or there's some deductions. If you go through that little schematic, we end up with a net amount that we can recover. We divide it by, 10 years worth of land values that we'll be estimating. And if it's greater than 4%, then we can only charge the 4%. But if we come in at 2.5%, then that would be the rate that we would impose, 2.5%. So you have to justify it up to 4%. Past that is capped.
Perfect. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else? Councillor Munch.
Good day. Thank you. Good seeing you. Was this report prepared?
Sorry, the presentation?
Yeah.
The latter part of last week.
Okay, so how come we got this morning? Why did we get this report and at less than an hour before council meeting?
Miss Lee, do you want? I mean, I think, I'm not sure who wants to answer that.
Good morning, Councilor Munch. My apologies. Yes, the presentation was sent at the very last minute.
Why?
Okay, if I may, I mean, go ahead and answer that. I think this is the purpose of this meeting today is for education for the council, which we're receiving. So, I mean, I think there is some time after this where input is going to be received, and up until what is the next step in the process?
It's on the slide. If you look at the slide.
No, I know. I agree that I just don't have it off the top of my head. But there is some time after today to make comments and refer that back to staff as well. So
That's
anyway.
correct, Mr. Mayor. So throughout the next week or so, we'll finalize the strategy and release the draft bylaw. So we'll have a period of 2 to 3 weeks where we would engage with the development community and for everyone to provide us with the feedback.
Including council.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead, Councillor Munch.
No, Mayor, I'm okay. Why don't you keep talking, and then after you're done, I'll go.
Councillor Munch, as the chair of the meeting, I'm trying to help to give the answers that are necessary. And so that's part of my duties. So if you have the floor, if you'd like to continue, go ahead. If you're finished, that's fine.
Okay, so my question again, I'm not sure why that dialogue just took place. This report was done last week. Why was this sent an hour before the meeting?
Well, I'll take part of that. But on the last couple of days, there were circulation in between the different departments. We did receive comments back. I had sent it to the treasurer at the very end of the day on Friday. I understand on Saturday when she was going to look at it, power failures and such, and she did apologize for not being able to access it because apparently her community was down for a day and a half. And I got the final impact, the comment back on actually Monday morning, and we made the final changes, and that's what was circulated. So in part, it was late on our stage, but then the final circulation, the weather had an influence on that. So I do apologize.
Thank you. I'm not here to place blame. The issue here is about level of expectation. There are people today who are still out of power in our community. When we do things at the last second, we have a counselor who had to go on video because he has internet concerns. I'm not sure if that's power, what have you. We have a responsibility. We have a housing affordability challenge. We have people under immense stress. We've had questions here today with regards to certain points, and it appears that some of us may not have been able fully to embrace what's happening here. We are stewards of the people. We need to do our engagement. And if we're just going to sit there here and listen, it leads me to wonder why in less than an hour before are we getting such an important thing as this? And to me, it's not acceptable. It's not personal. I appreciate your thank you, but this is a very important. You've spent a lot of time doing this. You do a lot of municipalities. You said in your presentation, other municipalities are doing this and that. We want to react to it, not get basic information. So if Watson Associates is saying that they did not have the preparation to give to members of council and the public for less than an hour in advance, then you're not prepared. And my expectation as a behalf of the public is that we're getting a prepared presentation so that we can do our due diligence, because our responsibility as stewards of this community is to make sure that we're doing the best that we can. And I can't prepare to wait on fingers and thumbs an hour before to hope to get a transmission. My staff yesterday were saying, hey, we're still waiting for this presentation. Yesterday, it's okay, regardless of power or not. We were out of power too, working the entire weekend, cutting down trees and doing shingle repair work, not just doing a presentation. There was power available. And if you weren't prepared, we expect that should have come first to say, hey, sorry that we weren't preparing the public. So I'm not pointing personal blame, but my expectation of this would have been in front of the public. Having said that would you please go through slides number 11 and 18 very slowly and expeditiously, and through you, the chair, I hope that you'll give him a lot of extra time, because an hour before, as you pointed out, you weren't sure about next steps when you interrupted. I would hope that you would give him the time to go through this so that we can clearly understand and go through what the contexts are, because I have some questions to go immediately thereafter. It's not personal. I'm just saying my expectation is that we're prepared to do our due diligence so we can give the value proposition so public and future generations who expect open, transparent, and professional engagement in an hour before with such an important presentation isn't enough for me. Now, I may not be as good as some of the other people on council, but I certainly need more time. And I have calls and things to do as well. And this is an important topic because the quality of life, and you hear things about percentages. So please, let's go through slides 11 and 18 very slowly so I can understand it, because I don't fully comprehend everything.
Go ahead, Mr. Scanlon, and take as much time as you need.
Okay. And formally, I'd like to apologize to members of council. This won't happen again. So speaking to page 11, then, which is the colorful chart, if we take a look at the green, similar to development charges, we start with, it actually says, we start with the amount, type, and location of development. So we've selected a 10-year planning horizon. There's no specific time horizon, but we've looked at a 10-year as being the most acceptable. From that growth, we can't impose it on non-res. So commercial, industrial, institutional is not included. Low density, medium density, we're not going to consider. Then we have to isolate the high density, but not all apartments would be falling into this category. You're going to have apartments that may be built in single family homes. You may only get a 3-story or 4-story high rise. It wouldn't be eligible. So we're needing to go through with planning in order to assess the potential units that will be eligible, eligible for that charge. And that's why the kind of arrow goes off to the right and comes back down, because that'll be part of the calculations later.
Oh, I'm sorry. I looked away from my screen. Councillor Silovitz, you have a point of order. Thank you, Councillor DePaulo.
Thank you. I don't mean to interrupt. My apologies, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Scanlon, but can we please have those slides being discussed on the screen? I would appreciate the visual. Thank you.
Good point. Thank you, Councillor Silovitz. Let's get that up, Mr. Clerk. Mr. Scanlon, if you just hold on for 1 sec.
I will.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes. So I was just speaking only to the green box that's at the very top of the schematic. as we come down, you can see that there are there's a number of different services that the municipality provides. So we need to assess which services would be potentially included within where we're going to start talking about future capital projects. There's only certain services that we can include. So those DC services, we're not going to talk about. And then the rest become eligible for consideration. So that little box that's blue, numbered number 2, that's off on the left, that's just trying to identify the services. And actually, if I jump ahead, if you take a look at the boxes on the right-hand side, A, B, C, D, those are the services that we've talked about. So there may have been services that you, or different types of capital works that you had historically negotiated with the Section 37. All of the non-DC eligible services would be considered, and I went through a listing of that. And then we could also ask for additional parkland contributions over and above what your parkland bylaw provides, as long as it doesn't conflict with your parkland bylaw. So those are the key areas that we're looking at. So as we come down, the estimating the increase in need, and then so that's by the individual services, and then looking at the capital projects, all of that's part of the discussions and considerations we would go through with staff. Now, similar to it, the orange boxes are similar to what's laid out in the development charge. So is there excess capacity that can accommodate some of the growth? We need to turn our minds to that. Is there a benefit to existing residents? So there's no definition of this in the legislation, but we're using the what the development charges has provided for, and there's been a lot of case law behind defining what benefit to existing means. And then obviously, if there's any grants or subsidies or other contributions that are anticipated, we would deduct that from the project, so we end up with a net cost at the end. And that's what that kind of turquoise dark colored box is. Number 8 is the net cost. We then need, in very simple terms, on the right-hand side, the growth comes down. We're going to look at the, we can either consider the bylaw across the whole city, or we could vary it by area. So you could have a reduced area at 2%. Or just apply 4% across the whole city. As I say, depending on the land value, will vary across the city. So the actual amount of the recovery per property will vary depending on that value. And as we come down, when we have that total project cost, we're going to divide it by the land values that we expect from the growth forecast. So the amount of land for those units times the an appraised value as of today. And if we can calculate 4%, then 4% becomes the bottom, the amount of the charge. The charge is a percentage, it's not a dollar amount. So that explains the steps that we go through. If there's anything that through you, the chair, if there's anything you want me to revisit in my explanation, I'm more than happy to touch on that.
Dave, thank you. Great slide. Great explanation. I really enjoy your presentations.
Thank you.
The knowledge is unbelievable. I wish we could spend an hour. I really do. Having said that, I want to go through a few things. So we talk about less excess capacity.
Right.
So if I'm a builder and I'm going to build capacity, who determines that capacity? Staff or the person who's putting the infrastructure? How is that capacity explanation, and how is that evaluated, and how is that gauged with others that are coming on the capacity?
So it's defined by the municipality. It's not the individual developer. The capacity relates to individual projects that we're bringing forward. So probably an easiest way to look at it is if you did a parks master plan and we want to include the land, and maybe we're going to provide for 7 acres per 1,000 people of land. That's a provincial standard, 7 acres per 1,000 people. Maybe you've only right now, with the growth forecast that you're anticipating, we're going to need a lot more land, but your parkland development bylaw, your parkland bylaw will only give you, let's say, 50% of that. So so there's no excess capacity, and looking forward on what you need, you actually are going to have a shortfall by the time we get to the end of the 10 years. Now, in the inverse, if you went through your parks plan and you were running at 10 acres per 1,000 people, and your parks, your parks bylaw said you really don't need any more land, then you've got excess capacity. Your growth, your 7 acres per 1,000, you apply it, you're still going to be more than enough land at the end of the 10 years. So it's a judgment call on some of the services, whether there's enough capacity to accommodate the growth, or if you've got a recreation master plan, a cultural master plan, a number of these different studies give us insight into the future on what services are needed. And from those services, we get the capital projects.
Is there a timeline expectation for this?
We look out, well, in this particular case, we're going to be forecasting out 10 years. So that's the time horizon we would be looking at.
So if I look back to 2012 and I look at the forecast from the studies that you've done in 2016, I unfortunately saw the 2016 and the 2018, I think in the 2019 and then the 2021. Okay, I didn't really see because I was on council and I saw previously. In 2012, our expectation of growth versus the reality of growth, what happens if it's not met?
The way the Development Charges Act, and very similar the way this is structured, is to take a look, forecast a level of growth during that 10-year horizon. If the growth is more and then identify servicing needs associated with that growth. If we're growing far faster and you achieve it in 5 years, it means, you should have constructed all that work, and we got to revisit and maybe identify additional works because you're going to have more growth than you anticipated. The inverse is if we slowed down for any number of reasons, and we've slowed down the growth, it just means that through the capital budget process, you may not need to construct all of those projects. Like we're going to grow by 100,000 people. If you've only grown by 70,000, you would expect during that 10-year planning horizon, you would have slowed down a bit on the projects that are coming through the Treasurer's annual capital budget process.
Okay, I'm not sure if there's my time's up, I'll do a second round.
No problem. I'll put you down. Thank you. Okay, anybody else? Oh, sorry, Councillor Pirelli, I see your virtual hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fortunately, Councillor Munch has already asked the questions I was going to ask, so I'll reserve my right for a second round if necessary. Thank you.
Okay, no need to reserve. It's as of right. So is there anybody else on the first round that would like to speak? Okay, seeing none in person or on the screen. So I do have a couple of comments, and thanks for the presentation. And actually almost all of the questions that I have was going to ask have been answered. I did actually have the opportunity when this meeting was announced to reach out to a number of different staff. So some of the questions I had were answered even before this. So I appreciate the time that various staff members have taken about this issue. I know that the CBC thing has been coming down the pike now for quite some time, and it is a substantial change. I think there's some benefits to doing it this way as opposed to the Section 37 thing. And I think there's also going to be some challenges. I'll just mention, I do appreciate the land value comment that you made and the fact that there is a process outlined in the legislation as to how we come up with resolutions where land values are not the same from the applicant versus us. And I am concerned that that could be a bit of a learning time, let's call it, in a positive way. But I hope that we can get through that. Okay, so I just want to just be a little bit clear on the 4%. So whatever percentage we end up going with, up to 4%, is set in the bylaw. There isn't a negotiation with individual applicants about which percentage is going to apply to them. It's a set percentage. You did mention that there is some possibility that that different areas could have different percentages. Is that what I heard?
Yes, you could elect for whatever reason to have a certain area receive a lower percentage, but generally, most municipalities are going with the set, whatever they calculate, and applies to all areas because there's a natural variation in the land. So there will be a reduced dollar amount depending on the area.
Right. Okay. My comment on that, I'll leave this up to experts, and I know you have an enormous amount of expertise in these types of things. I think it's better to set it, for some certainty, to set it across the board, and it is what it is. I mean, if different land areas have different valuations, then the amount will be different. So it kind of takes care of itself in a lot of ways. It's going to be the areas that are the higher density areas that I think are, we can take advantage of the CBC the most. One of the things that was not on there, and I suspect I know on the list of things that you can use a CBC for, that's not on there that I noticed is any program that has to do with affordable housing. Is that correct?
We are we're having discussions on that particular topic and including something in the calculations for affordable housing. So yes, when we come back, there'll be some contributions towards that.
Okay, so it is possible that programs that deliver affordable housing could be used as a part of the CBC.
That's correct. Yeah, but obviously we have to be in step with the programs that the region provides, et cetera. So there's no conflict in the programs and such. And I think we've had a good discussion with planning and with Treasury on that. So there will be inclusions within the bylaw.
Okay, that's good to know. I think that's about it for me for now. This has been a good discussion, and I appreciate this. I think that, I presume that across Ontario, this is going to apply to all 444 municipalities. Is that correct?
Yes and no. It's available to all municipalities, but when you hit a number of 176 municipalities are up in the north, there's only 8 of them that really would see any buildings like the Sudburys or the Thunder Bays. So I would suspect we're going to see them probably in the range of about 50 municipalities, those that will have that hit that criteria of 5 stories and 10 units.
Right.
So.
Okay. I mean, I would have to assume that being that this is a new program that's based kind of on the DC old program, that there's still likely going to be some learning that's going to be happening, as we go, and modifications. You had referenced that between Bill 108 and Bill 109, there were already some modifications before the program even started. So I also am very cognizant of the fact and appreciate that, staff, they're moving parts here that are all, moving along at a timeline that is, we're moving towards a deadline. So I appreciate all of that that's happening. And, I think, we need to be able to put a bylaw in place that's going to serve our community the best that it can, knowing that there's likely, there are going to be some, some adjustments that are going to be needed along the way. So, I'll leave it at that for me for now. So we got to go to a second round. So Councillor Munch, you had said you wanted to lead us off.
Good day. So thank you. So further to my first conversation, I said slide 11 and 18. I'm hoping we're going to go through this, but I want to stay on slide 11 right now. And I have a stopwatch here, clerk, and my stopwatch doesn't seem to be jiving with yours, just to let you know. I expect my clock to tip down when I'm speaking, not when others go. Just want to let you know that I'm getting a big difference in my time frame versus yours. Having said that, as and when the mayor speaks, it shouldn't come off my time, which happened last time. So anyway, the provincial legislation of 7 acres per 1,000 people. When we're doing destination parks or community parks, so can this be used in cooperation with that? Is it who decides as to how that works?
So just to be clear, the 7 acres per 1,000 is a standard that the Parks and Recreation Ontario.
Excuse me, point of order.
Councillor, you got a point of order? Go ahead. What's your point of order?
That's inappropriate.
What? Taking a photo?
We're in a meeting.
Okay,
We have a public, hold on, you have to hear don't interrupt me, please, sir. I know you want to react. I need to manage now. Manage versus reaction.
oh, so I'm managing you?
Hey, am I saying, I have a point of order. I'd like to communicate.
Go ahead. You're communicating. Go ahead.
So this is an important meeting.
No one's saying it's not.
So we need to have respect for council, the process, the public, and the presenters.
I couldn't agree more.
So
What's your point of order?
my point of order is when I see a party move forwards in front of a presenter, I feel personally that's a little bit of a disrespect to the people that are speaking.
Okay.
Do you not feel that way?
No, that's fine. Well, I totally understand what you're saying. The situation has resolved itself. You're right. Go ahead.
So it's happened before. You haven't acted. It's not the second time.
There
It's
has
the
not
third
been a
time.
point of order on this before,
So
Councillor.
again, sir,
Go ahead.
Sir,
This is not a time to berate other members of
it's
council.
not berate, sir.
Councillor,
It's
you're
a-
asking questions. Go ahead and ask your question. You said it yourself. That's why we're here today. Go ahead.
Okay, I just expect mutual respect. I expect
And you
respect.
have mutual respect, Councillor.
But the presenter was not given mutual respect at
You
that
have
point.
mutual respect, Councillor. Go ahead and finish asking your questions out of respect. Go ahead.
Well, I hope from the future you'll be on top of it, right?
Councillor, go ahead and ask your question.
Okay.
Okay?
On behalf, I apologize, sir. On behalf of council, I apologize.
I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. So the 7 acres per 1,000 that are provincial legislation.
If I could be clear, it's not provincial legislation. It's a standard that's adopted through Parks and Recreation Ontario. And most municipalities embrace in and around that standard that Parks and Recreation Ontario, which is, the key organization for that group that they recommend.
How does the Oak Ridges Moraine affect parkland in that valuation?
I don't believe that the moraine lands are owned by the municipality. It could be wrong. There may be portions of it. But normally the open space areas of a municipality are considered to some extent through the rationale of looking at the activities. I believe that there's limitations on those lands on what you could build. So building, in certain instances, sport fields or baseball diamonds or those type of things may be restricted. So that's where municipalities come back to looking at the land and own, and they can program and include as part of what they provide to the residents. So I don't believe open space, conservation land, stuff like that is included in those calculations.
Thank you for that last comment. Conservation land. So I like that. So now I'm getting an understanding because I'm not familiar with the full capacity of the legislation, although I have read part of it.
Right.
Very complicated. And it's really, I appreciate that comment. Really do.
My pleasure.
So the going through the benefits and the less. So when we're going through the spreadsheet of this formula, how then, if I'm going to be a builder and I'm going to be doing a building and I get a understanding of a site plan approval, I'm now going for draft plan, site plan approval, I'm now going for my building permit. And when I'm going for a building permit at that point, my costs have a discussion and my costs go up, right? Let's just say that land goes up 2 years from now relative to today, just for a concept. So if land goes up in value in that concept, and if I have a management structure saying I have to account for that, and then that's going to likely increase the cost for that unit, correct?
If you've done your pro forma 2 years ago and today the land values are different than what you included in your pro forma, obviously they would go up. Yes.
Okay, so the concern I have is always about who is determining all of this, because we right now have, to some people in this province, we're in a housing crisis. This municipality hasn't, this council has not said we're in a crisis. I've tried to move motions, but didn't evolve where anybody else on council wanted to move forwards with that. But many people in this province, and seeing we're rated the 3 of the top 10 least housing affordable municipalities in North America, although we only have 8% of the population. The concern here is how are we accommodating families and growth, and how are we presenting this? Because that $2,500 figure, in fact, would go higher then, because if I'm a builder making 12%, and the municipality says, I'm going to increase taxation to 28, 30, 32% total with this, I'm going to have to add my buffer because there's no margin there. And that affects the housing unaffordability. And that affects families and way of life and where people are going to work and play. And if businesses are going to come here, and I want us to be competitive. So who's determining all of this at the end? Is it simply a negotiation between staff and the actual builder at the stage when they're ready to build?
The bylaw would provide whatever percent you select would be the amount times the value at the time of building permit.
Okay, and is there
So,
any?
and negotiation is, I guess, if you wanted to build variation in there, I haven't seen municipalities building variation, and but I have seen municipalities who are addressing this right now. Sorry for my finger. I'll do this way.
No,
So I am looking at municipalities who are considering putting together, similar for development charges, where they'll have some form of grant program. And the council says, okay, here's the framework on which we want to provide some level of relief. And you have your formulas, if you're not collecting the money, you're losing the money. So it's normally being funded one way or another. But councils normally feel more in control of who's receiving the benefit if it's done outside the bylaw. I have to provide a 4-corner definition and what's the program, who gets it and such. And unfortunately, we're not that good at drafting these things. So we're going to cover every angle that council may say, well, I really didn't want that one I didn't mean that type of development or that particular one should get relief. So municipalities are looking to do it outside, have a grant program of some sort and do it outside the bylaw. And then you maintain flexibility. And if there's any variations in provincial legislation, it's a lot easier to move in and refine your policy rather than having to go through a process in order to amend a bylaw. So there are easier ways, and I think more direct ways that council would be more pleased to do it in that alternative rather than trying to handle it all through a bylaw.
It's a tough balance when you need to set the parameters high so you have the flexibility. And then at the implication stage, you got to have the opportunity to negotiate with that. I don't even know. I just need to be more experienced. Be honest with you, so I'm so glad you're here. My question there is then, if we're going to go down the path, how can a community benefit? Where if I'm a builder and I say, okay, we're going to go and let's use an example of a ministerial zoning order, or if I get a ministerial zoning order and those, especially in EMZO, how do we know if there's any, are the province discussing community benefits, or is it simply municipality? Do you know? If I get an ministerial zoning order, do they set any bar for community benefits at all?
I don't think there's anything included within that. I'm not aware of it.
Okay, so that it's totally separate then, right?
I would believe so.
That's-
I mean,
I don't know.
I'm not a planner, I'm an economist, but my knowledge of what I've seen is that there's no restrictions that have been provided through those ministry zoning orders that would restrict your ability to impose this type of charge.
What happens if a municipality is at the mature end or decline end of the life cycle? How is a municipality in Southern Ontario? You do a lot of municipalities. My understanding is you do the vast majority, if not all of them.
50%.
Okay, so in Southern Ontario?
Yeah, and across of like for development charge bylaws, we
Yeah.
do over 50% of the bylaws.
Okay, so you handle your fair share, okay? So what happens if a municipality is at the mature end of the life cycle and obviously you're not getting the growth and you've got this huge infrastructure? How is a municipality supposed to, on the mature to the decline end of the life cycle, how is that coming into our path going forward?
Well, you could use Toronto if they're probably the ones that are closest to, I think, that definition that you're using. And, you know, with redevelopment and intensification, that's where it becomes interesting for my job is to be able to distinguish what would be replacement in the assets versus what is expanding or realigning that service to accommodate growth. So that's where the unique discussions come into, and we normally discuss it at board hearings, but it comes down, a lot of times comes down to individual projects and the nature of what the municipality is trying to achieve.
So how do we get to the point, York Region has declared we're in the mature end of the life cycle, and my concern is that how do we determine that repair and replacement versus our capacity, and how do we manage that budget going forward? Because I want people to have water, 70 years from now, 50 years from now, 30 years from now,
Yeah.
and roads collapsing. How do we deal with that?
Well, if this is in the CBC, I don't think we do, because as I say, most of the projects are DCable. So you've got what's growth related or capacity expansion related would be covered under the DC. The non-growth component, the benefit to existing deduction, then has to be funded through your capital budget process. It has to be planned, funded through debt or through contributions, reserves, whatever. So that's, asset management's a very key thing, especially with the big assets, water, wastewater, storm, roads. They're the big ones. But for the CBC, for the most part, we're not embracing those big items, but there could be certain services where you're refurbishing, expanding a cultural building. And we would look at that and apportion, if we could, apportion towards growth in this aspect. The rest of it you'd have to pay for through the budgeting process.
Through you, the chair, are we allowed to make motions at the meeting?
This is a special council meeting, but Councillor, your time is up. So if you can wrap it up, that would be great.
Are we in a capacity to be able to move motions at this meeting?
As far as I know, as I mentioned at the beginning, and the motion that's on the floor is to refer all comments back to staff. That's kind of the purpose of this meeting, and to be updated on the CBC bylaw. But I guess procedurally, Mr. Clerk, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a special council meeting, and there is a motion on the floor, but an amendment, as always, could be entertained. But if you've got one, I'd suggest that you motion that now because your time is up.
I'd like to move an amendment.
Go ahead.
So I'd like, based upon the comments for today, I would like to have the opportunity whereby we have either a special council meeting or a further dialogue because I'm not aware of any economists on staff. And here we have an expert giving us information, and this expert's really important to me so I can prepare this organization, because he clearly an expert and a lion's share, and a lot of municipalities trust him. So I'd like to have an amendment to the motion to add an opportunity whereby council, either through the chair or in some way, shape, or form, have an opportunity to understand through some form of education or engagement process outside of their limitation of time here, so that they can assist us in getting and understanding and progress so that we're sustainable long-term. And I'm worried, very concerned that we may not be fully aware. So moving comments back to staff is great, but as was pointed out by the Mr. Watson, is to Watson Associates is to say we're going forward. So I think we need to have an education process of which council is involved.
Okay, Councillor Much. So
move a motion to say I would like to add an opportunity for council to be engaged in some way, shape, or form prior to presentation.
okay, in some way, shape, or form, can you be more specific on that? Because for the purposes of an amendment, that probably would be important.
Well,
Like, are you talking about a special council meeting? Are you talking about an opportunity to reach out to staff and ask them questions? We could have done that before the meeting, as I mentioned. We can certainly do it after the meeting. And we have resources on staff that I'm sure could answer all kinds of different questions that you might have. I've experienced that because I reached out to staff before this meeting. Are you specifically asking for a special council meeting or just an opportunity to reach out to some of the folks on staff and Mr. Scanlon?
Mr. Scanlon, Watson Associates are the expert. My
Okay.
position is, I'm answering your question. The request has been to the presenter who has the information and is working with us to come to give the information to council.
Oh.
It's not a staff. I'm happy to speak with staff as well, but we want to engage with outside
Okay,
consultants.
so are you asking for a special council meeting?
That is one of the options, yes.
Okay,
I'll
well,
leave it up to the chair.
but in an amendment, you said you used the word in some way, shape, or form. I mean, we need to be more specific if you're putting an amendment.
Well, so if you.
Let me ask a question for clarity. Mr. Scanlon, are you available to speak to members of council if we have questions after this meeting?
I'm always at council's pleasure. If it's a one-on-one, I always answer in saying, I want to follow whatever your protocols are and for engagement, the rules of engagement. So
Okay.
I'm happy to engage though.
Okay, so Ms. Lee, did you want to add anything? And then I'm going to go back, see if we can clarify this amendment. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may. So Councillor Munch, we have a special council meeting that will be scheduled when we bring forward the draft strategy as well as the report. Are you suggesting that we have another special council meeting prior to that, just for clarification?
100% yes, because for staff, if we have a scenario whereby we're moving our processes forward, so staff going to bring it forward to a strategy, we're going to say, receive it back to staff and approve it. But the dialogue and exchange and of trying to get input there, and as pointed out in the presentation, in some municipalities in this province, actually council actually sets some bars. When the staff come with their presentation,
Councillor Munch, no, I know you're over time. What the issue that we're talking about right now is to get this amendment that you're proposing. So can you help the clerk, because all of the words that you've said can't be in an amendment. So let's work to refine the amendment so that we can follow the proper processes and put this to council.
Sir.
Yes, sir.
We were having an exchange.
No, but your time is up, Councillor. If you have an amendment, then give the clerk the wording, because at this point in time, I'm pretty sure the clerk doesn't have the wording. See if we can get the wording formalized so we can put it up on the screen and then council can consider it.
There was a question posed by a presenter back to a member of council. As council was giving a dialogue back to that question, the chair, so is it your position, sir, that you don't want me to answer the question because I'm going to challenge the chair? So a question was asked, I'm answering it back, and you said you don't want to have a dialogue because you want to move the motion.
No, I did not say that we don't have the dialogue. Councillor, this is really simple. Your time is up. You're putting forward an amendment. So that is what we're doing right now. If you have an amendment, put it forward, give the clerk some wording.
So
that's all
Sir,
we're asking right now.
Yeah, but I was asked a question.
But it's not, but right now it's not, your time is finished. You've had 2 rounds. Right now, at the end of your second round, you've asked the clerk to put forward an amendment. We're
So-
still waiting for this amendment.
So
That's
you-
what we're doing right now. So go ahead, give the clerk some wording, and we'll move forward like we would in any council meeting.
So you don't want me to respond to the question?
No, I don't. Right.
I
I
challenge the chair.
think I've made
I
that
challenge
clear.
the chair. I challenge the chair.
Challenge the chair on what?
I was asked a question.
After your time is up, and right now what we're doing, and I'm telling you as the chair, right now, you said you wanted to put forward an amendment, which is fine. We're trying to find the wording of the amendment. It's not time for additional commentary. It's time for putting forward an amendment.
Thank you. I challenge the chair.
On what?
I was asked a
So
question.
you're, okay, well, tell me what it is. Give me a brief description on what your challenge of the chair is, because I'm not even clear on that.
So this is the fifth time now.
Well, then
I'm-
explain it clearly,
Okay.
and then we won't have to
There
go
was
to
a
a sixth time
There was a question to a member of council.
after your time was up. Okay, do you have some wording, Mr. Chair? Because I can't seem to get it from Councillor Munch.
Okay, it's not the wording. At the end of the day, I still challenge the chair, sir.
Again, challenge the chair on what?
I
Give me
was
some.
asked a question. I would like to respond to the question. You're saying you want to go back to the clerk. I want to challenge. I have a question.
Okay,
That was
the
raised with regard
challenge
to
of the
process.
chair, just a second. The challenge of the chair is that we're not allowing Councillor Munch to respond to a question that was asked after his time was up. Mr. Clerk, does that give you enough for the challenge of the chair? Okay, thank you.
Through the chair,
Can you just explain what yes or no means for clarity?
through the chair. So the vote is on whether the ruling of the chair should be upheld. If you vote yes, then you agree with the chair. If you vote no, then you disagree with the chair.
And what exactly is the challenge? So you can get clarity. So the question he asked you was, he wants to know what yes and no is. We understand what that means. The question is, what is the challenge? So members of council understand what that is.
Thank you. I understand that the challenge is whether or not the member's question should be allowed.
After the
So-
time
And
is up.
I'd like this a recorded vote. Want to know if a question is asked to members of council, if council should be responding, the chair is saying, no, I'm going forward.
To be clear, Counselor, this is a specific question on a specific incident. Go ahead, Mr. Clerk. This is not a general thing. This is a question of your time was up. We're trying to get an amendment on the floor. You challenge the chair. This is what we're dealing with right now. Go ahead, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you. So voting on whether the motion or whether the ruling of the chair should be upheld, Councillor Munch,
No.
Regional and Local Councillor DePaula,
Yes.
Mayor West,
Yes.
Councillor Chan,
Yes.
Councillor Silibets,
Yes.
Regional and Local Councillor Pirelli, Regional and Local Councillor Pirelli, please. Regional and Local Councillor Pirelli is absent. Councillor Shepherd,
Yes.
Councillor Liu. Councillor Liu, please. Councillor Liu is absent. Councillor Barros. Councillor Barros is absent. The ruling of the chair is upheld.
Okay, thank you. Now, Councillor Munch, let's get this amendment on the floor so that we can proceed with it.
I moved my motion. You asked for clarification. What is it the clerk does not understand in the motion that I move forwards? The chair asked for clarification, went out to the staff and our
Councillor
consultant.
Munch, you're doing it again.
You
We're
asked a- you asked
it's
a
a
question.
it's a simple question.
Okay,
The
I moved my
question is,
motion.
what
I
is
moved
the
my motion.
wording? Mr. Clerk, you have some wording that you've deciphered out of all of this conversation. It's on the screen.
And that's not my motion.
What would you like changed, Counselor?
I said that I'm asking that an amendment move forward, that our consultant Watson Associates is able to engage with members of council in some way, shape, or form. That was my motion. All the rest was the banter that all members that were voted for, that voted against, by the way, that's on public record, that I'll be putting
Okay,
out there.
this is banter. So, Mr. Clerk, do you have that? Now, I am concerned about in some way, shape, or form. I don't think that's the language that we would be able to put in a valid amendment, but that's just my opinion.
My amendment. Thank you.
It is, you're right, absolutely. I don't think it gives enough clarity. Is there some way we can
You don't want
improve-
clarity. This council does
Sir,
not want clarity.
excuse me.
I'm going to interrupt you just like you do me, sir.
No, excuse me. I'm the chair of the meeting here. We're trying to get this process
Then
finished.
move my motion.
Fine, put the motion in the way it is. Go ahead. That's the amendment.
Oh, let's go. The
All
council
right,
have the
so we have an
I'm not
amendment
finished,
now.
sir.
We have an amendment before us, and we need to have a vote on this amendment. But before we do,
that's not my motion.
we need a second.
It's not my motion.
Sorry, Mr. Clerk, did you capture the in some way, shape, or form amendment? So put that on the screen.
Through the mayor, Councillor Munch, if you would like to dictate or please let me know what to adjust on this motion.
I'm happy to do this for all day. I have all the time in the world.
Well, we don't. So
Sure you do.
out of respect for the
bantering.
rest of council,
Keep
change
bantering.
the wording the way you would like to change the wording, Councillor. That's all we're asking of you. It's not that complicated. What words would you like in there? What words would you like out? Let us know.
Okay. So the council and the public. So it's not a private behind the scenes. I talk to staff without any clarity,
What
transparency.
words would you like? Continue.
the
We don't need the
council and the
commentary,
public-
just the words. Your time is up. It's been up a long
Thank you.
time ago.
That's good to know. The council and the public have the opportunity to further discuss the draft strategy of Watson Associates in some way, shape, or form prior to the presentation of draft strategy of council. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, so that's fine. Okay, good. Do we have a seconder for this motion? Councillor Silovitz, I see your hand. Is that the second? No? Okay.
No, that's to speak.
Okay. I'm asking for a seconder. I am seeing none at this time.
Mr.
nobody-
Chairman, give me a moment to read the amendment, please.
Okay.
I'm happy to second that amendment.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to speak to it?
I would, thank you.
Go ahead.
As I stated earlier, I was pleased to see that Councillor Munch had asked the questions that I was going to ask. Thank you, Councillor Munch. He's absolutely correct. We need a further opportunity to make sure that all of the things that lead up to the final meeting are, discussed thoroughly with members of council. At the end of the day, I think it's council's will that needs to be upheld. Not the will of staff and not the will of the consultants. And so for that reason, thank you, Councillor Munch. I agree with your amendment and I'm happy to second it and vote in favor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor DiPaolo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very satisfied with the timeline as discussed and presented both by our treasurer and by the representative from Watson and Associates. I think there's ample opportunity. The representative from Watson and Associates has said that it's, via our protocol, he's going to make himself available for questions to be asked and answered. And we've got a timeline that has to be met. I think we have a September deadline to get this in place, and I think the strategy that it's outlined is been excellent. I mean, we are going to have a circulating draft strategy that there's lots of time to discuss, and then there's a council meeting scheduled on this. We're already having a special council meeting on this one issue as it is today. I mean, there are hundreds of issues that we could convene as a council to specifically discuss, and this was an excellent opportunity. It's a very clear presentation of the facts, and there's ample opportunity to ask further questions. So I'm not going to be supporting this amendment.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Silvitz? Sorry, Councillor Chan, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. In the spirit of getting further input from council members, and I see the word the public, certainly in principle that I would support that. I think that something I'm not comfortable with and concerned with is that in some way, shape, or form, it's so general. I support it in principle, but in the phrase I just mentioned, it would leave so ambiguous. Are we talking about, I believe the chair did try to help in, are we talking about having another special council meeting, which I would be something that I would support, because that is very clear. That would be the opportunity, not only for council members, but members of the public to provide, written submission prior to the special council meeting, or, appearing as oral delegate. I have to say I support in principle, but I'm not comfortable and have concern how that some way, shape, or form means. Because the last thing I want is that if that's not clarified, that opens to different interpretation to different people, that at the time of presentation of draft strategy to the council, there may be question about, well, was there any opportunity actually have taken place for people to provide input? So maybe the mover, just a suggestion, may want to make it more precise in the form of special council meeting. I think that would be helpful. I just want to say I do support in principle, but I'm concerned and not clear that leaving it the way in an ambiguous way is the best way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Councillor Chan. The words "in some way, shape, or form" are too vague to satisfy the requirements of, I'm not sure whom, but too vague for me to support. Should the mover wish to specify which way he would like further communication to be, conducted, I'm happy to support. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there anybody else? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion on the floor. We need to vote on that. And was there a recorded vote was called?
Yes, please.
Okay, recorded vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Voting on the motion to amend, Councillor Munch. Yes. Regional and local Councillor Pirelli.
Sorry, yes.
Yes, please.
Councillor Barros.
Yes.
Councillor Chan.
Yes.
Councillor Liu.
Yes.
Councillor Shepherd.
No.
Councillor Silvitz.
No.
Mayor West.
No.
Regional and local Councillor DePaula.
No.
That motion carries.
Okay, so we've got back to the main motion. Councillor Silvitz, I think was your hand up for second round?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would ask that when we get to voting on the motion that we separate now, because these two, the amendment that's just passed, please separate it when we vote. I agree with what Mayor West was saying with regards to the 4%. I think that I do believe that it should be a blanket 4%. If we start picking and choosing, I think we're going to place ourselves in a very, very vulnerable situation. And we are, as the city and the council, we are the ones who need to control that. I also believe if we have a 4% blanket over the entire city. It could work as a deterrent to some developers or builders who wish to ask for an OPA or a ZB LA during the planning process in areas where policy dictates lower rise buildings and less density. So that's the only comment I wanted to make on that. I think it needs to be a blanket 4%. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else on a second round? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Clerk, we've got the main motion as amended. Out of interest, so there's been a request to have them separated. Can we separate them, given that that B was an amendment that was passed?
To the mayor. Yeah, I don't believe that these are, I would see these as mutually exclusive. One is to bring comments to go back to staff, and the other is to provide council and the public the opportunity to further discuss. I would see this as something that could be voted on separately.
Okay, so we have a request to have them separated. Is there anybody that would like to have a recorded vote on
Yes, please.
Okay, on A and B? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you.
Point of order.
Councilor Pirelli, point of order.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the clerk, we just voted on an amendment that was passed. In order to re-vote on it by separating it out, would a motion to reconsider not be in order?
Thank you, Councillor. That was essentially my question. Mr. Clerk, your advice on that? We're just waiting for an answer, Mr. Regional Local Councillor Pirelli.
Just so we're clear, council moved an amendment to the motion. Through the chair, I want to be clear. Council voted to amend a motion, and now we're looking to.
That's what we're looking into, Councillor Munch.
Just want to make sure. That's good.
That's fine. No, you're right.
Thank you. Through the mayor. So a motion to reconsider, just as what we have in the procedure bylaw, says that subject to paragraph C and D, which we'll read after, council may only further discuss any resolution or any matter previously considered or decided by council during the current term of council, one within the same meeting as when the matter was considered upon council passing a motion to reconsider pursuant to paragraph D. So if we go to that paragraph, so paragraph C says, any resolution, bylaw, or any other matter considered by previous council in previous term of council may be considered at any time after that term has ended without the need to pass a motion to reconsider, which is not in this case. And D, a motion to reconsider may only be debated as to the advisability of reconsidering the matter, may not be amended, and requires 2/3 votes to pass. The question is whether or not the amendment was considered. And whether it was considered within the same meeting as to when the matter was considered upon council. So I suppose in that case, perhaps a motion to reconsider is required for paragraph B, considering that it was already voted on to add to the main motion.
Okay, so you're saying, Mr. Clerk, that there would be a need for a motion to reconsider in order for us to separate out the two pieces, which is actually what I was concerned about as well. So I think that the ruling would have to be that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Clerk, that separating out these two pieces of the motion would not be appropriate. It's a package at this time due to that point.
Through the mayor and to council, I apologize. Yes, that would be the case. However, if a motion to reconsider was put forward, it could then be separated out if required.
All right.
And then I withdraw my request. It doesn't have to be such a problem.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have a motion on the floor and a recorded vote has been called. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you. Voting on the main motion as amended, Councillor Munch,
And just put on screen so I'm clear when I'm voting on, please.
A point of order.
Councillor Pirelli, point of order.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just for the record, could you let us know your ruling on my
No,
point of order? Was my
I thought
point of order upheld?
Yes, it is upheld. And
Thank
I
you.
think I made that clear through my comments, but you're right. I did not say that it was upheld. So
Thank you.
we will be going to a motion, or I mean, a consideration of the motion as it is as a package.
Thank you.
Councillor,
Answer your question, Clerk. Yes.
Mayor West,
Yes.
Councillor Shepherd,
Yes.
Regional Local Councillor DePaula,
Yes.
Regional Local Councillor Pirelli,
Yes, please.
Councillor Chan,
Yes.
Councillor Liu,
Yes.
Councillor Barros,
Yes.
Councillor Silovitz.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. So at this point, we have a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of this meeting. Councillor Silovitz, Councillor Shepherd, all those in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Okay, and the last thing is adjournment. Councillor DePaulo, Councillor Shepherd, all those in favor? Opposed?
Yes.
Aye.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That seems to carry. Have a good day, everybody.